All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Open your Bibles to Genesis 9, verse 20. Genesis 9:20. I was in a rush when I called out 9:37. It said Jesus is calling, but that's not Jesus is tenderly calling you home, calling today. That's not that song. I didn't know what that song was. So thankfully, I had 30 seconds to pick a new song. Whatever it was. Where is Billy? You in here? Where? There he is. Yeah. Listen, let me tell you something. It was a really good devotional. But the next time you're going to go 30 seconds, let me know. So I'll sit in the front. Because I walked all the way to the back. I sat down. I thought, well, I got to find another invitation song. And all of a sudden you're saying, please come now. I'm like, ah! Next time, warning. Genesis 9:20. So Noah and his family have disembarked from the ark, and presumably the animals have all gone their separate ways. They are driven by the instinct with which God designed them to have, and so they're off doing what they're supposed to do. It is people who struggle with the doing what they're supposed to do part. Noah, after he exits the ark, where exactly he is relative to the ark is we don't have that anymore. But he begins to be, my Bible says, a husbandman, which means he begins to be a vine dresser, a vine planter, vineyard maker, things like that. And there it is. He says he planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and was drunken, drank too much of the wine and became drunken. And then he found himself uncovered within his tent. So Noah decides the best way to celebrate his role as the remnant of humanity. The best way to celebrate him being the last surviving patriarch of patriarchs in a world that has doomed itself because of its sinful excess and revelry. The best way to celebrate that is to get absolutely smashed and pass out naked in his living room. This is not a template. This is not an example to follow. The flood washes away sinners, but it does not wash away temptation. So Noah builds his wine vineyard, drinks of his wine vineyard, drinks until he gets drunk, and then, for some reason, strips down, I guess, to sleep it off. Alcohol thins the blood. It relaxes the central nervous system. It makes it where you're breathing and your heart rate slows dramatically. And so this is why, we've all been to high school. You've seen it happen. Hopefully you've just seen it happen. People just get passed out when they get wasted. And so here is Noah in that very timeless situation. And then Ham, verse 22. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, that's Noah, and told his two brethren outside the tent. So, as always with Moses, sometimes frustratingly so, his writing style leaves out all the details we might want. Leaves out all of the, well, why does this happen? And what is the thought process here? What's compelling this person to do this? And you rarely ever get that with Moses. Only every now and then. Those are treasures when he gives you those. He mostly just sticks to just the bare facts, and then he just moves on. He tells you what it was, and then he just moves on. Here, you just give him bare facts. And if you only had verse 22, if you just had the bare facts of verse 22, you would not really have much of an indication that something bad had happened. Because again, all it says is Ham, Noah's son, goes into the tent. It's just walking into your father's house. So he walks in there, he sees his dad is naked and passed out, drunk on the floor. So there's nothing about that implies anything nefarious that he was doing or had done or intended to do, anything bad at all. It's just a wrong place, wrong time kind of situation. If you just had the verse here, that's all you get out of it. But Moses is not writing a verse. Moses is writing paragraphs and paragraphs of a giant text that will eventually be compiled together in a Genesis text or Genesis through Deuteronomy scroll, which itself will then later be cut up and chopped up into all the little helpful verses to help us memorize it. But we don't memorize it anymore. We just read it. We read it like fortune cookie cutter kind of statements. And so we take 22 and we just separate it and we think, what's the big deal? Well, you have to keep reading. And eventually the big deal will start to reveal itself, just not as explicitly as we might want. Verse 23. So, 22 ends, Ham going in, sees his father, leaves, and then immediately tells his brothers about what he saw. 23. And Shem and Japheth, that's the other two brothers, they take a garment and they lay it upon both their shoulders and they walk backward and then cover the nakedness of their father. And their faces are backward because they didn't want to see their father's nakedness. So Ham comes out of the tent, tells his brother what they saw. His brothers do more than just talk about it. They actually act in a way to restore some moral dignity to the situation. They will even walk backward to avert their eyes from seeing their father's nakedness. Remember, we are just 10 generations removed from Adam and Eve. We are just 10 generations removed from when they first sinned. The first reaction they had to it is, we need to cover ourselves because nakedness is a thing to be ashamed of. Where they had no concept of shamedness prior to their sin. But this is now a world where sin happens, where sin exists. As we say, it's a fallen or a broken world. And so that comes naturally. Once you reach a certain age, you start to appreciate the human body and you want to cover yourself. Granted, we live in an era today where people walk around half naked at Walmart, but at least back then, it was understood to be a thing where you cover yourself. And that sense of decorum and morality has now been violated by Noah, and two of his sons decided to do something positive about it. The third son did not do that. He just went out and started talking about it. Is that a hint at what Ham did was wrong? Maybe. But again, Moses doesn't flat out say, here's what Ham did and here's why it was bad. In fact, Moses hasn't even said that Ham did anything wrong yet. But keep going. Look at the next verse. Noah, later on, awakes from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Now that's a smoking gun, right? Moses doesn't give you any more details. So if you're on the edge of your seat wondering, I got nothing, because Moses has nothing, or nothing to say, nothing to write. So I can only speculate, and we could only just evil surmise and only assume and guess, and we'd have to go down a very dark path to speculate what that could be. So let's not even do that. We just have what we have. I don't think it just means, maybe it does, but I don't think it just means what he did was he saw his father's nakedness. Because there's nothing to imply in the text that he deliberately went in there to see that. Maybe that's there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that is implied. But nothing explicitly is said that he intentionally went in there to observe his naked father, okay? Which would be immoral, and so you can understand the problem there. It reads to me like it's a very passive thing. He just happens upon it. But the phrase here, what his younger son had done, that's not passive, that's active. He deliberately, intentionally, purposefully, actively did something. Whatever that was, Moses, I don't think, says. But whatever it was bad enough that he's going to be cursed and all his descendants for it. I think, as we get to it, let's go ahead and get to the next verse. Verse 25. Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." And then the next verses are going to go into that, how the descendants of Ham, Canaan included, will become subservient in one way or another to Japheth and to Shem. I think the point of this text is not, as we often try to do, dwell on Noah and his sin here. That is not the point Moses is making. That, for the writer's perspective, is the means to the end. The point that Moses is saying is, here are the circumstances that happen to lead to Noah cursing this one descendant. And it's relevant, and in fact that's the reason why in verse 25 it doesn't say cursed be Ham, it says cursed be Canaan, who will be a descendant of Ham. It's the reason why Moses writes it that way and why Noah says it that way by prophecy. Is because the point of it is not to focus just on this isolated incident of wickedness. Here's this guy who just, imbibes and he gets drunk and he passes out. Oh, that's a shameful thing. That just leads you to the real point, which is here is this entire lineage that is cursed in one way or another, either militarily or spiritually, to be subservient to his two brothers, Japheth and specifically Shem, who will be the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jesus. So what you have here is Moses writing to his contemporary audience, the Israelites of his day, the post-Exodus people who will first read Genesis. And he is included in this first book, Genesis. Exodus is their book. This is their history. Genesis is like their ancient history. So Exodus is what they did, what they experienced. But Genesis is just the ancestry history. So what Moses does in that first book is he includes these little references, these little notes here and there to give some historical context or some grounded mention that will kind of help his audience say, oh, I see how that relates to me. I see how that relates to us, the nation. This nation that is about to go into Canaan's land. And they're going to go into it initially saying, we can't take it. We can't do it. We cannot invade. We will be crushed like grasshoppers or crushed by giants. They're going to say all these negative things. And they're going to go to Genesis and they're going to say, but God has cursed that land. And God has cursed the descendants who owned that land. And God has promised their land to us. And we have a right to claim that land because they are cursed to be to be submissive to us. So that, I think, is the real goal here. That's what Moses is getting at here. Yes, it comes about because of what Noah did. But Moses just blows right by that to say that set up this cursing to Ham's descendants. And as we'll see later, the blessings to the other two sons, Shem and Japheth. Verse 26. So he curses the one, and then he says, and blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Now, he basically already said that in the previous verse. A servant of servants shall he be to his brethren, but that's a curse to one. Now you get the blessing to the other one. The blessing is Shem and Japheth in a minute are going to be the superiors over. They're going to lord over in one way or another this third brother and his lineage that will follow. I think, as I say, I think that's the point here. And so what you have essentially, therefore, is Noah offering a bit of prophecy and promise that will ultimately, in the form of Shem, come to fruition not just through Abraham, the descendant of Shem, or even Isaac and Jacob, or even the nation that will settle in that land, but ultimately Jesus Christ, who is of that same birth lineage. That he, through his spiritual kingdom and his spiritual reign, will put all nations under his feet, and make him the head over all things to the church, which is his body. So you have the spiritual promise that's tacked onto the back of this worldly one. Then you get to verse 27. God shall also enlarge Japheth, the other son, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. So you have, over the course of these 3 verses, this hierarchy being established, and it's completely irrespective of birth order. It's purely about who is going to be blessed and who's going to be cursed. Ham is going to be the bottom of that pile because he did the evil thing. Whatever it was and whatever happened, he's going to be cursed. And then you have Shem and Japheth. Shem is going to be in the top, and Japheth is going to be in the middle. Why Japheth is there and Shem up here? As it says in verse 27, he's going to dwell in the tents of Shem. He's going to be with, but not above, and Canaan shall be his servant. So it's stacking the order like that. Bottom, middle, and top. Shem is going to be on top. And you see that play out through the rest of Genesis, with the descendants of Shem being Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joshua becoming this great figure in Egypt. And then Japheth under him. Japheth has presumed that his descendants and lineage and so forth will encompass Asia, like classical Asia, like Turkey and so forth, with some spreading out into like the far western part of Europe, going down into settling on the islands of the Mediterranean, and then circling back around into the territory of Ham. You've got Greeks and Romans who will eventually come into power, and they will come to occupy a lot of this territory, subduing, therefore, the traditional claim of Ham and his land, so being submissive to Ham under Japheth. But then you've got, rising above all of that, is Shem, this land that is promised to them, and this Messiah, Savior of the world, who will come and claim all of the world to himself. So again, the hierarchy stacked like that. Verse 28. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. And you get to 29 to finish the sentence. And all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So you had throughout Genesis chapter 5, if you remember, this long list. We're going to get another one, genealogies of these people. This guy begat sons and daughters, lived this long, and he died over and over and over. And then you get to Noah, and everything just stops, and we have this big interlude, the flood. And then Moses comes back to that, and he says, now we wrap up the story of Noah like this. He lived this long. He had his 3 sons, not many sons and daughters. He had his 3 sons, but they will repopulate the whole earth. And then, of course, he's going to die. Genesis is a huge history book, obviously. When you look at it, it's such a massive text. But really, when you boil it down, it is just about how God moves the world around 5 key people. Adam, Noah. So we've only covered 2 of them. Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. You got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Isaac barely gets 2 chapters. Really only a chapter and a half. Abraham gets a lot of text, and then Jacob gets a lot of text, and his son, in particular, Joseph, gets a lot of text. And those are your 5 people. And then Moses is the writer. He's the 6th one kind of behind the scenes. And it's just how God accomplishes all this from the literal beginning to a very settled and established world, does all this through 5 key people. And any one of them individually doesn't seem like much. Not any of them, I guess arguably you could say Joseph does, but none of them become some great leader, some amazing world figure. But little as much when God is in it. And look what he accomplishes through each of them. All right, that's that. Verse 30. Oh, no, there's no verse 30. Chapter 10, verse 1. Chapter 10, 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. So buckle up, we're going to go through another genealogy. I guess I shouldn't say we got to go through. It is inspired of the Holy Spirit. It is recorded for a good reason. It's the stuff that we kind of our eyes gloss over, and when it's the Bible on tape, we fast forward through it, but you shouldn't do that. It's worthy to be considered, even if there's not a lot of meat on these bones. Bones make up the skeleton, which make up the whole. So it's worthy of at least a mention. And there are some things we can identify as we go through these. The sons of Japheth. Let's start with the middle one. Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. 7 sons, predominantly settling northwest, northeast, and east of classical Israel. Greece, Russia, India, China, these sort of regions is traditionally thought to belong to them. Magog is the only name that may catch your eye. That's Revelation 20, verse 8. Gog and Magog mentioned there mostly to be a stand-in for a cardinal direction. Like we don't anymore, but we talk about the Orient as the East, Oriental, East Asia. So we have in that sort of mentality, Gog and Magog, north of Israel. But here, it's just an actual person who's going to settle the land. Verse 3, the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphtha, and Togarmah. I got nothing. They lived, they were real, they're part of a larger picture. Their point is not to say, well, what did they accomplish? I'm sure they did something. I'm sure they loved their dog, and I'm sure their children loved them a lot. But they didn't accomplish anything in the big picture. But they were a cog in the wheel that made the big picture be what it is. They were a brushstroke, I guess, in the big picture. Keep the metaphor intact. Verse 4. And the sons of Jabin were Elishah, that sounds right, Elishah, and Tarshish, and Kittim, and Dodanim. One of those, maybe two, will catch your eye. Tarshish, that's where Jonah tried to flee to. He didn't make it. That's modern-day Spain. Kittim, that's Cyprus, the island on the Mediterranean. Verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, after their families, in their nations. That phrase, divided in their tongues, well, that hasn't happened yet. But you probably know that's coming in the next chapter, Tower of Babel. That's when the language will be divided. So what's Moses mean here? Does that mean the language is already divided? No. All this is doing is, this is what's called prolipsis. It's Moses is living post-Babel, and so he's writing about it with that understanding in mind. He's letting the people know that after that happens, they're going to scatter and settle, and they'll form all these lands, and they'll have their own languages, they'll form their own culture, they'll become their own nations, and then, we'll see them again later in history. But he's just using prolipsis. He's writing about the event after the fact, before it happens in the narrative. Like when you say, I met my wife in the 3rd grade. Well, she wasn't your wife in the 3rd grade, was she? But I met her in the 3rd grade. She's my wife now. That's prolipsis. Anyway, verse 6. And the sons of Ham, I'm going to go on a whole big rant about Looney Tunes in a minute, so just get ready for that. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. Yes, that is how you pronounce it. P-H-U-T. It's pronounced Put, not Poot. Put. You got to say it like that. Ham. That's the bad son that we talked about earlier. Several names may jump out at you here. Cush, Ethiopia, northeastern Africa. Mizraim, classical Egypt, north of Africa. Put, sometimes pegged as Libya, which is due west of Egypt. Sometimes it's lower Egypt, with Mizraim being upper Egypt. Upper Egypt, lower Egypt is about their location on the map, really their elevation. Lower Egypt is closer to the Mediterranean because it's lower in elevation. South on the map is upper Egypt because it's higher in elevation. Upper Egypt. That's why when your Bible says we go up to Jerusalem, even though you're in Galilee, Jesus, why are you going up when you're going south? Well, because they didn't have north, east, south, west like we do. To a Jew, north is where your nose is pointing. East is where your nose is pointing. And so if this is east, this is north, and this is south, and this is west. But we always orient it like this is north, and I have to find it. But the Jews did that with east. Anyway, you have these names. Verse 7. Stop me if you've got a question about any of these names. I will not have an answer. And the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah and Sabeth and Ramah and Septica. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Why mention their sons? Well, they're going to be relevant. Sheba is eventually going to have a great kingdom, the queen of which will eventually come to visit Solomon in 1 Kings 10. Verse 8. Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. Let's read the next verse to finish that thought. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. Which basically just means when you encounter someone who's a great hunter, you say, this guy's a great hunter. He's like a Nimrod. Okay. Today, if you call someone Nimrod, yeah, you're giggling. You're ahead of me. That has a different connotation. All right? It used to be. We used to live in a society where you could call someone a Nimrod and it was a compliment. Because that was what it was in verse 9. If someone was an actual legitimate great hunter, you said, wow, he's like a Nimrod. He's like a Nimrod, the hunter before the Lord. But then, in 1941, Elmer Fudd went after Bugs Bunny. And he fashioned himself to be a great hunter, hunting this rabbit. And as he was trying to capture this rabbit, he kept being foiled by this rabbit. And the rabbit, in a moment of levity, as he is wont to do, sticks his thumb out and says, this Nimrod over here. And every single person in that audience who in an era they would have been more biblically literate than we are today, would have instantly understood what he was doing, that he was being sarcastic, that he was referencing the actual Nimrod great hunter by saying this Nimrod is clearly not an actual great hunter. It would be like if there was some guy who fancied himself a great mathematician, and he clearly was not, and you're watching him flail at the chalkboard, and you finally say, this Einstein over here thinks 2 times 2 is 2, and not 4, or whatever like that. So you would call someone an Einstein, and everyone in the room would immediately know, Einstein really is a great mathematician, you're being sarcastic, this guy is not. That was Nimrod. Today, we've forgotten all about the hunter part of that, and we just call dumb people Nimrods, which is fine, I guess you can do that. But it was about hunters. It was specifically about this hunter who was actually a great hunter. Don't call people dumb. You shouldn't do that. Verse 10. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. See, he's even more important. And he's completely lost because of one joke that Chuck Jones wrote 60 years ago. 70 years ago. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Remember the land of Shinar? That will be the place where the Tower of Babel, there's Babel again, is built. Erech, my Bible spells it E-R-E-C-H. Later it will be Uruk, which is the center point of the Gilgamesh epic. Gilgamesh epic is going to come along much later, and it will have its own version of the flood account. A stupid one, as we talked about earlier. This Nimrod thinks he can write the Gilgamesh epic. See how that's out of context? But think about it in the context of history. Uruk, from whose land will come the Gilgamesh epic, Uruk is a legitimate descendant of the actual Noah who lived through the actual flood. The tale of which would have passed from father to son and father to son and father to son until eventually it reaches the ears of someone like Gilgamesh, which by now has completely been bastardized, totally corrupt, totally lost the plot. They've lost all the sense of what actually happened, and it's become this paganized version of it, which then is written down and preserved for us in the very few scraps we have called the Gilgamesh epic. So there's the connection there. Verse 11. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah. Moses is not saying that in the days of Noah or even Noah's grandchildren was the mighty city or even empire, certainly not empire, but even city of Nineveh. He's not saying that. What he's doing is he's giving his contemporary audience a frame of reference. Hey, you guys know Nineveh, and they do. I mean, it's not the empire, it's a city-state, but you know Nineveh, this is where it came from. This is the origins of the settlement that would become Nineveh. Verse 12. And Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, the same is great city. And Rezin, by the way, we don't have a record of. There's no archaeological evidence for it. But you know what? There's like a whole lot of stuff we didn't have archaeological evidence for that the Bible talks about. And like 10 years ago we found a bunch of it, and 20 years ago we found some more of it, and 40 years ago we keep finding archaeological evidence to prove what the Bible says. And it just keeps happening where skeptics and critics say, oh, there's no archaeological evidence of this city, therefore the Bible must be fake. And then 10 years later, we found it. And they hold up some pot that says belongs to Rezin or whatever. And they just silence themselves, and they just pivot to the next thing to talk about. They keep losing, but they keep fighting. Verse 13. And Mizraim begat Ludim and Anamim and Lechabim and Nephtuhim. Egypt places. Verse 14. And Pathrusim and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistine. There's a name you may recognize, at least a part of it, the root of it. And Caphtorim. So what you've got are sons of Mizraim, sons of what will become the Egyptian land. They break away. They go across the Mediterranean. They settle in their own lands and so forth, and eventually come back over the Mediterranean on boats and great ships, settle in Cyprus and Crete, and then form their own culture and their own identity, and then sail from there back to the land where, I'm not going to draw the whole map for you, but, you've got the... Africa. All right, and then, there you go. So, Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Promised Land, Mount Carmel, which should actually be along here, but it's not. This is not to scale. Anyway, you've got the islands. So the thought is that these descendants, that these descendants sail and they settle, and this is not just Bible scholar. This is just general anthropologist thinking that the Philistine people, who, again, for a while, we didn't know they were, and now we found that they are. Bible's right again, back in 1000, that they eventually, it is thought, settled in like Italy and Greece and that place, and the north of that, and then eventually settled onto island and after island, and then eventually came back and settled and formed what we call the cities of the Philistines, which, we'll run into them in like Samuel and Kings and so forth. And so that very clear and obvious thing that I've drawn shows you the path that forms what eventually become the Philistines. No nation just forms in a day. It's refugees or it's travelers who go and they settle and they pick up a culture and they go and they pick up more culture and different culture and they go and they pick up and adapt to different, they conquer, they adapt and they lose and they adapt different cultures until eventually they settle and they become an established thing. Thus, Philistia, establishing there. Verse 15. And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth. Sidon, that catches your attention maybe. Tyre and Sidon, they would be like, here. Because this is not to scale, so it really shouldn't be like that, but it's roughly here or so. The island, city-states, and so forth. Tyre in particular. Oh man, I just love the story of Tyre, but who has time? I do, because Bill only gave a 30-second devo. Tyre and Sidon, you've got this island kind of there, and for a long time, they were the Walmart. They were the hub of market and merchants, and you went there for all of your goods, and you hated going there as much as you hate going to Walmart at 11 o'clock at night. But you went there because they had it all, Tyre and Sidon, the sister city-states. And they're there. And for centuries, all of these places get conquered and taken over. You've got Tigris and Euphrates. You've got Babylon, you've got Assyria, and you've got the Macedonians, and they're all coming. Alexander, everybody, they're coming and they're conquering all this stuff. And Persia's over here, they're changing hands, changing ownership. And meanwhile, Tyre just sits there, this perfectly protected island city-state, until along comes Alexander. And he does not back down from a challenge. And Tyre, he sets his eyes on it. I want to conquer Tyre. And Tyre says, nanny boo-boo, you can never conquer us. So Alexander takes that as a personal challenge. And he literally, no fooling, this guy builds a land bridge using conquered lands to get to Tyre. And imagine being Tyre. It's like in Monty Python, the French soldiers, they're watching, the grab coming. You're watching this island of yours slowly get taken over by this land bridge, and you're watching Alexander just stare at you, just aura farming, just staring a hole in you as they're slowly building. He's getting closer, and he's getting closer, till eventually you're not an island anymore, and he marches in and takes the city. And to this day, Tyre is not an island, but in antiquity it was, and that's just history. It tells you, this is the New Testament period history, but that he does that. Anyway, that's Tyre, but this is Sidon. They were there too. Verse 16. And I don't have a lot here, okay? I'm working with what I got. And the Jebusite and the Amorite and the Girgasite. These names are familiar when you get to Numbers and you get to Joshua. They will come up a lot. These will be, and beyond, these will be occupants of the promised land that God's people will battle. David famously will conquer Jerusalem from the Jebusites. Verse 17. And the Hivite and the Archite and the Sinite. The Hivite, they're singled out as a people that God promises they will take the land from in Exodus 3. Genesis 10:18. And the Arvadite and the Zemarite and the Hamathite, and afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. When were they spread abroad? Probably post-Babel. They start spreading out all over like the western side of the Fertile Crescent here. So there they go. Verse 19. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou come to Gerar and Gaza, not the same Gaza we read about too much today in the news. And you go, as you go, unto Sodom and Gomorrah, we'll get that in chapter 19, and Admah and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. So the region that is occupied by the descendants of Canaan stretched from Sidon in the north to Gerar and Gaza in the south, all the way to Sodom and Gomorrah, which is presumed to be about there, even unto Admah and Zeboim and Lasha, presumably all southeast of that. You got the Jordan River and the Mediterranean forming these two water boundaries, and everything land in between is what everybody fights over today. When God already said, that was like my people, we're supposed to have that. And then once Jesus comes, it no longer matters, but we keep fighting over it because the kingdom is everywhere. But I digress. Verse 20. And these are the sons of Ham. This has been the sons of Ham after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations. So, Moses is setting you up for what will happen in Babel. This is just saying after Babel they will all scatter in all these different places with their language, cultures, and nations developing. Verse 21. Unto Shem, father of all the children of Eber, E-B-E-R. Your Bible spell it that way? Everybody's Bible say E-B-E-R in verse 21?
Yes.
Okay. We'll come back to that. The brother of Japheth the elder, even to him that were the children born. So, if you remember, you had this three-tiered hierarchy with Ham is at the bottom, Shem is going to be at the top, and Japheth is in the middle. But Japheth here is the elder. At least that's the way the King James translates it. Other translations say Shem is the elder brother to Japheth. That's kind of the modern reading of it. But the Hebrew is really kind of unclear, whether it's saying he is the elder or this guy is the elder to him. But it doesn't matter. Either way, Shem is going to be the dominant ancestry line of all of these. Shem. So if you are racist toward a Jew, they call you anti-Semite, right? The ethnicity of that people is Semitic. Their culture, their language, and so forth, classically it is called the Semitic people. This is the Semitic language, the Semitic land, Semitic culture, etc. Semitic. Shem is that. Shemitic. Shem, Sem, Shemitic, Shemitic, Semitic. That's just the way the language developed. But that's who this is. He's called here the father of the children of Eber, but there's no E in the Hebrew. In fact, there's no vowels at all in Hebrew, which makes it very frustrating to read sometimes. That's why I don't know Hebrew very well. But you've got this, you have accent marks that make you make breath sounds. So it's really burr with a h in the front of it. So it's hupper, hupper, Hebrew. This is Hebrew. Now the word Hebrew, it is thought, the meaning of it would come to be the one who passed over. Because you've got Abram, who is going to be here, and he's going to come, basically follow the Fertile Crescent. He'll stop here for a little while. And then he'll eventually come back down into the land. And as he does, he will actually cross over the Jordan River. And they will start to call him the one who crossed over. The one who crosses over into our land. And that word they associate with, well, who are you? I'm a Hebrew. Well, you're the one who crossed over. And those two things just get sandwiched together. That's the meaning of Hebrew, which is just a thought.
Now, do you have a question? Since you just have said you have time.
Yeah, sure.
The concept of him cursing his descendants.
Oh, you've been holding on to this one for a few minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah. How does he, is it like he distributed his inheritance differently, or like how does a man have the power to curse descendants for generations?
All right. Put it in this perspective. You also have this as a form of prophecy. So it's also identifying how things are going to shake out for your descendants. And it's not going to be good for Canaan, specifically in the realm of you're going to be subsidiary to Japheth and Shem. So later on, when we come into people like Jacob and Esau, the sons of Isaac, and Jacob will steal the birthright and the inheritance from his brother. In that case, you actually had things to give. Noah doesn't have anything to give. What Noah gives is, as these three people eventually have children who have children of children, these three bloodlines are going to form basically the totality of the human race. And as it's going to shake out, this one is going to be cursed. This one is going to be subsidiary. This one is going to be subservient to these other two. So it's not so much of, I'm going to give you less, because Noah doesn't have anything. He got off the boat with nothing. Right now he's naked, so he's got nothing. So what he's doing is basically saying, as these things play out, here is by inspiration, here's how you're going to get less than what the others get. And your descendants are going to be cursed. It's similar to how when God offers a word to Rebekah, and he says, you got two nations in your womb. Well, you got two kids in her womb, but God says two nations are going to be in your womb, and one is going to dominate the other. The younger dominate the elder. So something like that, I think, is more what it's more like. But later, when you get to Isaac, and he's blessing his sons and giving the inheritance, once he says you have received the blessing, even though later he's going to find out that, oh, I was duped, I was hoodwinked, I was tricked, you can't take it back. This is the law of the culture. Once you've given it, it's given. Even if it's just given as a promise kind of thing. Your word is your bond, which is the lost art in the world today. Your word is not your bond. But back then, if you said it, you would be cursed if you went back on it. So, that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, verse 22. The children of Shem, Elam and Asher and Arphaxad and Lud and Aram. Previously, Assyria was mentioned as coming into the land once ruled over by Nimrod. But here we're told the descendants of Asher migrate to that land and they eventually blossom into what will become the Assyrian Empire. But that's way off. Verse 23. And the children of Aram are Uz. I erased it. That's where Abram will come from. Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. The monster mash. Verse 24. And Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber. There's Eber, Hebrew, the ethnic name for the Semitic people. Verse 25. And Eber, to him was born two sons, one by the name of Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was ch10. If you dig, and you don't have to dig far, you'll find all kinds of wild conspiracy theories about what that phrase in verse 25 means. In his days the earth was divided. I just think it's a setup for the next chapter, when you have the Tower of Babel and languages are dispersed and people spread. That, I think, is all Moses is doing, because he's already alluded to that multiple times now. I think it's just another one of those. But if you dig, you'll find all kinds of nuts who will say all kinds of things, but I will not partake. Verse 26. And Ch10 begat Almadad and Sheliphaz and Hazar-Maveth and Jerah. 4 sons came from him. Nothing to say about them. Their deeds are not recorded. Verse 27. And Hadaram and Uzal and Diklah. These 3 more sons given to us. But again, nothing is said of them. And Obal, and this is verse 28, and Obal and Abamiel and Sheba. No, never mind. Forget that. Verse 29. I'm going to leave you hanging. I'm going to leave you wondering. I had something to say, but no, it's past. Verse 29. And Ophir and Havilah and Jobab. These were the sons of Ch10, the third of which sounds like someone's country uncle. Jobab. Verse 30. And their dwelling. Hey, you got Paul in Romans says, for I reckon. So if he's, that sounds like something a countryman would say. I reckon. Verse 30. And their dwelling was from Mesha, as thou goest up unto Sephar, a mount of the east. This really sums up what I've been saying. I've been being snarky about it, but this really sums it up. What you're getting here, it seems like completely out of context, out of need. Why do I need to know all these names? But they're putting together their skeleton pieces to make the whole. And what Moses is doing is he is telling his audience who are listening with rapt attention, and he's saying, these are your ancestors, and these are your ancestors' kin, they'll go over there, and then, yes, they'll eventually become your enemies, but look, we all come from the same origin, and we all come from the same God, and we all come from the same ark and all that. We have this commonality, this common bond, this connection with one another, and what Moses is doing is he's just giving his people some frames of reference. That's why he tosses out phrases like, their dwelling was there as you go from here to there. Well, that means nothing to me. I'm in Arkansas, but it wasn't written to a guy in Arkansas. It was written to a guy who would have these directions and would understand, okay, they're there, they're here, they're there, that's where they came from. That's the idea behind them. 31. This has been the sons of Shem, after their families, after their tongues, and their lands, and their nations. 32. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. There's that phrase again, the nations divided. Earlier it was the land was divided, which is why that one word difference makes people think something geographical, but I really think it's something cultural, is what he's saying here. That the people who inhabit the earth are going to be divided. Now, they were already supposed to divide, like by choice, because the refrain you hear multiple times post-flood is, go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. There were how many there were on the earth before the flood, but now there's 8, and 2 of them are done making babies. So there's 6 people through whom is going to come everybody. So God has well within his reason to say, go make babies. Go and be fruitful and multiply. And yes, you see that happen throughout this chapter. Moses is giving you the history of them doing that. But it's constantly woven in with this phrase, this happens after the dividing of the land. Because as we open up with chapter 11, nobody is going forth and spreading out. Everybody's just coming together to do one stupid thing. So God has to intervene. Genesis 11, verse 1. The whole earth was of one language and of one speech. That itself is not the problem. That's what it was. You had Noah and his language. His sons spoke the same language. And their wives. Everybody spoke that language. They get off the boat. They're speaking the same language. What language was it? But they're all of it. And they're all speaking it. Verse 2. And it came to pass. And you know what would have happened? I already rested. Well, what would have happened if they had done what God said? All speaking the same language. That they would have all spread out different places. And languages would have naturally developed. Because that is just what happens. Like we speak a different language than England speaks English. 90% of our words are the same, and we have such a commonality and connection with them that we know each other's different words, but we call it sprinkles. You know what the English people call sprinkles? Like sprinkles on a Christmas cookie? Hundreds and thousands. It's not the stupidest thing you've ever heard. If anybody's from England watching that, come on! Hundreds and thousands. They have all their dumb little words for their bad food. Because languages evolve and change and develop. And American English, we grab back from French and from German and all kinds of Icelandic languages. We've taken from everything to make our language and our cultural stew. Because that's just what people do. You form new words. You have new figures of speech and new coins of phrases that become themselves words and languages, and you form a whole culture. Appalachia up there, all by itself, with its own crazy little language in the eastern part of America. That's just how languages are. So this would have happened naturally. The problem is not God looked down and said, oh man, we've got to give them new languages. The problem was they didn't go out and spread, and they became compacted together and very arrogant and decided to defy God. So here we are, verse 2. It came to pass as they journeyed from the east, that is just a bunch of people, journeyed from the east, They found a plain in the land of Shinar, previously mentioned in the previous chapter. And so they decided to dwell there. So this is Babylonia, Chaldea. This is that sort of region. Abram will come from this region. God's people, ironically, will go back to this region in captivity. So here they are, verse 3. And they say to one another, all right, everybody, go to. Let's take brick and burn them thoroughly. And so, because we have brick and stone and slime we can use for mortar, so we're going to build us something. All right, verse 4. And they said, go to. Let's do this. Let's build us a city and a tower. Now, we've already read multiple times of people building cities. The problem is not just the fact they wanted to build a city, but then there's that tower. Let's build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name. Now we've got the problem. The humility of man out the window. Let's make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. In other words, let's not do what we were told to do. We were told to go scatter, to spread out. This is not them predicting the punishment that will come. The punishment that comes forces them to do what they were told to do. All right, so don't get that backwards. They're simply saying, I don't want to do what God said. I want to make a name for myself. Whereas a person who obeys God elevates the name of God. I want to make God's name magnified and make God be this being. So when other people see what you're doing and they ask you why, well, it's because God has said. So you make God's name great. But these people say, let's make our name great. How do you do that? By not doing what God said. And what did God say to do? All he said was, go, spread, make babies. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to build us a big tower to show God that we can be on his level. Maybe not literally, but at least proverbially. We can be on your level and we can decide for ourselves. Where have we heard that before? In the Garden of Eden. I will decide for myself what is good and evil. I will decide for myself what is tasty to eat. And here we are. 10 generations removed. Not one, well, maybe one generation removed from the flood, and we're right back to square one. Let's go and build a city and a tower up to the heavens, up to the sky. As big a tower as we could ever build. And let's make a name for ourselves instead of doing what God said to do. So, Moses says, God came down. Now, later on in Genesis, as Sodom and Gomorrah is about to get nuked from orbit, God comes down. And Moses writes it as if this is some unusual thing. And it is, but it was not an unprecedented thing. In the Garden of Eden, God came down and walked in the cool of the day and confronted his two children who had sinned. So from the beginning, God was coming down throughout Genesis. And you could even find him peppering throughout the whole Old Testament. God comes down. Not as a human, he may look it sometimes, but not as a human. When God comes down as a human, it will be as a babe born to Mary to grow up and die on the cross. But throughout the Old Testament preceding that, God, the Lord, comes down. In Sodom and Gomorrah, he's flanked by two angels who he sends to go deal with Lot while he stays and has lunch with Abraham and curses short-term Sarah for mocking the idea of her having a baby. So here it is again. It's not the Lord looked down from heaven and saw this construction project going on. It's God came down and then to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. So why Moses, Moses writes it that way. Why? He writes it that way because that's what God did. But why God did that instead of just observing it? Because it doesn't say God came down to see the sin of the world pre the flood. That doesn't say that. So God's, in his own prerogative, decides sometimes he's going to come down and see a thing for himself. And with eyes from this level, ground level. And that's what he does here. That's all I've got for you. I don't have any details about the why, because Moses doesn't give us the why. But God comes down ground level to see for himself. And the Lord says, behold, who's he talking to? God is a fellowship of three within himself. So God comes down and speaks within himself. Let's continue. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one. That is, well, let's let him finish. And they all have one language. And this they have begun to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. In other words, if something is not done to force them to spread out as I have told them to do, then they will just park it right there in the valley of Shinar, the land of Shinar, and they will never do all that I've told them to do. And what God specifically needs for them to do is spread across the world so that they could populate the earth. And God gave them the free will to do that. And he gave them the free will to disobey that. And they have chosen to use their free will to disobey that. So God will use his free will to spank them for disobeying that. And that does not violate their free will. That is well within the purview of God when he tells you to do that and you don't, for him to go, pow, now let's try that again. And that's just what God does, right? So here is God speaking within himself, saying, they haven't done what we've said. And if we don't interject, they will continue not doing what we've said. So we need to give them a spanking. Verse 7. Go on, go to. Same phrase they used. Go to. That's just an old Hebrew thing. Here's what we're going to do. Let us go down. Who's us? God is a fellowship within himself. If you ever get down the wormhole of studying Michael Heiser, which I would recommend you never do, because he is a false teacher. He's passed away now. Michael Heiser, you can find him on YouTube. I'd recommend you not find him, because he has all kinds of false doctrines as he talks about God is just one of many powerful beings in heaven who do all the things that God does, that God works with the angels and is alongside the angels and is contemporary with angels and so forth. All kinds. I'm not going to dignify it with more details, but he reads things like this, and he thinks the us is always God pulling his team of angels together to decide what they're going to do. God is sovereign, but God is a sovereign of 3 in 1, and he speaks within himself. And to himself he says, let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Which, in other words, let us just accelerate the thing which would have happened naturally had they chosen to obey us. We're going to just miraculously make their speech confounded instead of it just happening naturally. Incidentally, you notice the phrase, let us, we have seen that before, but not for a while. God speaks within himself in this way whenever he is reflecting on man being made in his image. Man was made to be in the multifaceted image of God. Man abuses that privilege when he sins in the garden and thus has to be driven out. And on those occasions, God says, let us make man. And he says, let us drive out man. Here, let us confound the language of man. In Isaiah 9, let us, unto us, a child is born. God will become himself in his own image, man. So, there it is again. Verse 8. And so the Lord scatters them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they all left off to build the city. In other words, they did not finish building the city. So they were however much into it they were. And if you Google it, you can find some unfinished ziggurat here that people have said, this is the Tower of Babel. Listen, if that thing was the Tower of Babel, it would be under a lot of layers of development because Rome still exists, but Rome as it was in Bible time, even Bible time, is under a lot of pavement. It's just buried as land and development and nature happens. So, no, you're not finding the Tower of Babel anymore. It's gone. It is either withered away or it has been long buried under the development and change of the world. So, but anyway, it was there, and God stopped them from finishing it and confounded the language. And so for that reason, verse 9, the name of it is called Babel, because the Lord there did confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. The word Babel in Hebrew means confusion. That's what Moses is saying. It's called that because God confuses their language, confounds their language. You might hear some people talk about the Tower of Babel, but it's the word Babel, because confusion and babble, that's the etymology of it. This person is babbling. He's babbling. I don't understand what he's saying. It's confusion. So that's the proper pronunciation of the word based on its meaning. So God confounds it. Yeah, we could stop there. Next is just another genealogy, but I will spare you another genealogy. Because this one culminates at the end of chapter 11 with Terah and, as we'll see, Abraham. So that'll be a nice little segue. Next week, we'll introduce Abraham, and then the quarter will be over, and we'll have our Thanksgiving thing after that. So I'm going to let you out 1 minute and 7 seconds early. You're welcome. Genesis 11:10 next week. Thanks, everybody, very much.
You did not.
Well, he was.